Why the Galactic Empire was inevitably doomed. A story of hubris, revolt, and the inescapable collapse of power. The fall was foretold. The Imperial archives of VYREX-9 were silent except for the hum of data scrolls floating between endless shelves. Here, where the past was preserved in sterile perfection, Grand Historian Cyril Vex found the one record the Empire had tried to erase, the inevitability of imperial collapse. It was written centuries ago by a man long since executed for treason. His name had been scrubbed, his memory cast into the void, but his words remained. And as Vex read them, he knew why. Greater than no empire, no matter its reach, can conquer time. The moment it believes itself eternal is the moment it begins to die. The Empire at zenith. At its height, the Galactic Empire stretched across tens of thousands of systems. Planets bent the knee, fleets obeyed without question, and the Emperor's word was law. The indomitable creed, the flagship of the Imperial Armada, had become a symbol of their unrivaled supremacy. In the eyes of the ruling elite, the Empire was immortal. But they did not see the cracks forming beneath them. The fault lines. The seeds of destruction were sown in arrogance. The Empire thrived on conquest, but conquest required an endless supply of war, labor, and obedience. Its bureaucracy strangled itself with inefficiency, corruption festered in its core, and the outer colonies, where people toiled under the Empire's heel, began to whisper of rebellion. The Emperor's response was swift and brutal. Entire worlds were burned as examples. Military governors ruled through terror. Dissenters were erased. For a time, it worked. Until it didn't. The revolt of the dead. On the prison world of DARVOSS-7, the first great uprising began. 1 billion prisoners, political dissidents, and forgotten souls, declared dead on official records, rose up against their captors. Their leader was a ghost, a former Imperial admiral named Tyrasrel, who had been executed on public broadcast a decade prior. Yet here he stood, flesh and blood, leading the charge. The Empire learned too late, its power had bred too many enemies, its reach had overextended, and now, the dead themselves marched against it. The Emperor's madness. With rebellion spreading like wildfire, the Emperor enacted the final decree, a scorched earth strategy that ordered the annihilation of any world suspected of disloyalty. Entire sectors vanished under the fire of Imperial warships. But the more the Empire destroyed, the more it lost. It was eating itself, accelerating its own demise. The death toll climbed into the trillions. The outer systems defected en masse. Even within the Imperial core, whispers of dissent spread through the ranks. The Emperor, in his desperation, retreated into solitude, speaking only to his machines and the shattered remnants of his court. And then, one day, he simply stopped speaking at all. The silent collapse. The death of the Emperor, whether by assassination, madness, or despair, was the last breath of the Empire. Admirals turned on each other, claiming the throne for themselves. Former governors declared themselves sovereign rulers. The once mighty fleets fractured into warbands. The imperial capital of Virulus Prime, once the heart of the galaxy, burned under siege as its own people stormed the palace. And so, the greatest empire in history, one that had ruled for millennia, was not defeated in a single grand battle. It rotted. It imploded. It vanished into history. Epilogue. The historian's warning. Grand Historian Cyril Vex closed the record, his hands trembling. The lesson was clear. The rise of the Galactic Empire was inevitable. But so was its fall. Empires do not crumble in a day, nor do they collapse from a single wound. They rot from within, layer by layer, until the weight of their own ambition drags them into the abyss. The Galactic Empire was no different. Despite its iron grip, its fleets of 1,000 warships, and its seemingly endless reach across the stars, its doom was written in its very foundation. This is not the story of a single rebellion or a lone hero standing against tyranny. This is the tale of an empire that was always destined to fall, because the seeds of its destruction were planted from the moment it was born. 1. The paradox of power. At its peak, the Galactic Empire ruled over tens of thousands of worlds, each vastly different in culture, history, and technological progress. To govern such a sprawling domain, it relied on brute force and bureaucratic control. It crushed dissent, assimilated species, and imposed rigid laws to maintain order. Yet, power is a paradox. The more control the empire exerted, the more resistance it faced. The more it sought to unify, the more it fractured. Entire civilizations smoldered under its rule, their people seething with suppressed rage, waiting for the moment to strike. The empire was not a government, it was a machine of oppression. And machines, no matter how well oiled, eventually break. 2. The unquenchable thirst for expansion. No empire survives by standing still. The Galactic Empire, like all before it, thrived on conquest. It needed new resources, new worlds to tax, new populations to subjugate. Expansion was its lifeblood, but the universe is not infinite in the way empires need it to be. Eventually, the empire reached the edges of habitable space, where expansion meant fighting wars that drained its economy, manpower, and will to rule. Border worlds became war zones, entire fleets were lost in battles that yielded little return, and rebellions flared up faster than they could be extinguished. The empire found itself stretched too thin, waging wars it could no longer afford, desperately clawing at the stars to sustain itself. And like every empire before it, it bled out on the battlefield. 3. The corruption of the core. While soldiers died on distant frontiers, the empire's core rotted from within. The heart of the empire, its ruling class, grew decadent, drunk on their own power. Senators turned into scheming warlords, admirals betrayed their own fleets, and governors siphoned resources for personal gain. Corruption was not a disease of the empire, it was its very nature. Bureaucracy strangled efficiency. Decisions that once took hours stretched into months. Fleets meant for war lingered in dry docks, waiting for bribes to be paid. Information was distorted, intelligence reports altered, and entire star systems fell into chaos because of political maneuvering. The empire did not fear an enemy from outside. Its true destruction came from within. 4. The unforgiving march of time. No empire lasts forever. Even the greatest civilizations of the past were reduced to ruins, their legacies nothing more than dust in the cosmic wind. The Galactic Empire, for all its might, was not immune to time. Technology that once secured its dominance became outdated. The weapons that had crushed rebellions were now wielded by rebels themselves. The rigid doctrines that had once brought order became suffocating, incapable of adapting to the changing tides of history. The empire was a relic of a bygone era, desperately clinging to a past that no longer existed. It did not evolve, and in the grand design of the universe, that meant extinction. 5. The unbreakable spirit of the oppressed. A people can be beaten, enslaved, and driven to despair. But the will to resist never truly dies. The empire built its throne atop the broken backs of trillions, believing that fear would keep them in line. But fear is a fickle thing. It fades, and when it does, all that remains is rage. The Galactic Empire created its own destruction. Every city it burned, every world it shattered, every life it crushed, it all added to the storm that would one day rise against it. The rebels were not heroes or chosen ones. They were simply the inevitable consequence of oppression. The moment the First World fell, the floodgates opened. Revolt spread like wildfire, and the empire, once thought invincible, began to break. 6. The final collapse. In the end, the Galactic Empire did not fall in a single battle. There was no dramatic last stand, no final cry of defiance. It crumbled piece by piece. The outer worlds slipped away first. The military, too stretched to respond, abandoned them. Sectors declared independence, governors turned into kings, and entire fleets deserted, tired of fighting a war they no longer believed in. The core worlds held out the longest. But without the resources of the empire, they withered. The great capital, once the heart of the galaxy, became a tomb. When the final remnants of the imperial fleet fell, there was no one left to mourn. The empire had believed itself eternal. But the universe does not care for arrogance. It was doomed from the very beginning. The weight of stars. The Galactic Empire was old, vast, and seemingly eternal. Its banners stretched from the burning hydrogen seas of Viridian Prime to the ice-plated moons of Solvex. It had conquered, assimilated, and ruled over trillions with an iron grip. Yet, like all things, it would fall. Not because of an outside enemy, nor a rebellion brewing in the outer rim. No grand battle or singular catastrophe would undo it. The rot was within, deep in the Empire's bones. This is the story of its inevitable doom. Chapter 1. The Emperor's Dream. Emperor Halvoth IX had a vision, to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. He inherited the throne of a crumbling regime, its foundations weakened by centuries of excess and complacency. The bureaucracy had swollen beyond reason. Millions of administrators, each siphoning power, each believing themselves indispensable. The Imperial Navy, once the hammer of the cosmos, now rusted in dry docks while admirals played politics. Halvoth sought to fix it. But empires, once they reach a certain size, become ungovernable. He enacted brutal reforms, pruning the corrupt, centralizing power, making the empire efficient once more. What he failed to realize was that an empire is not just a machine, it is a living thing. And when you cut too deep, you do not heal. You bleed. Chapter 2. The Weight of Control. With power consolidated, Halvoth waged war, against enemies, against ideas, against time itself. He feared innovation, for progress meant change, and change meant instability. The Empire's greatest minds were shackled, their inventions censored, their breakthroughs buried beneath imperial edicts. Great men and women fled to the lawless fringes of the galaxy, taking their knowledge with them. The stars beyond imperial borders glittered with rogue AI, radical sciences, and technologies that could have saved the Empire, if only it had let them. Instead, the Empire stagnated, its military reliant on ships centuries old, its industry built on outdated methods. And so, while the Empire held the stars, the future passed it by. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Masses. The Empire's citizens, once its greatest strength, became its greatest liability. For centuries, the core worlds thrived while the outer rim suffered. Entire planets lived and died without ever seeing a drop of imperial aid. The rich bathed in luxury while the poor fought over scraps. The promise of the Empire, order, prosperity, unity, had become a lie whispered by dying men. When the uprisings began, they were small. Dissidents on industrial moons. Food riots on neglected colony worlds. The Emperor's response was swift, merciless. For every rebellion, a world burned. For every act of defiance, 1,000 executions. But an empire is not a tyrant sitting on a throne. It is the sum of its people. And when the people have nothing left to lose, they will burn it all down. Chapter 4. The Final War. The Empire's doom did not come from an armada of rebels storming its capital. It did not come from a superior foe carving through its fleets. It came from 1,000 cuts, each wound self-inflicted. When the imperial treasury collapsed under the weight of endless war, the armies turned on each other. When the hyperlanes fell into disrepair, entire sectors were abandoned to anarchy. When the emperor died without a clear heir, the Great Civil War began. It lasted 30 years. By the time the last imperial banner fell, the empire was already dead. Epilogue. Ashes of a throne. The galaxy moved on. New powers rose from the corpse of the old regime. The empire became a cautionary tale, how arrogance, stagnation, and tyranny will always, inevitably, lead to ruin. Some whispered that the empire could have been saved. That had the emperor chosen a different path, had the people risen sooner, had the system adapted, it might have endured. But history is unkind to might-have-beens. And so, the Galactic Empire passed into legend, a monument to what was, and what could never last.